it's a good day to be a white mage in Magic the Gathering, because a bunch of cool new white cards just got spoiled. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today for another Kaldheim spoiler video. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different than the most recent videos that I've been doing, because normally what I do is I take a brand new card and I'll take things from Magic's past and tie them all together in a nice little package. But the thing is, all three of the cards we're going to talk about are all white cards. They're all 3 casting costs, and they're all warriors, but they are wildly different. So I thought today what we would actually do is something akin to a more traditional spoiler video and just take a look at each of these individual cards, because they are really, really cool. So we're going to start out with the one that unfortunately has a somewhat blurry image. It gets better from here, so just bear with me, my friends. So we're going to talk about Sigrid, God Favored, and this is a very unique and interesting card. So 2 white and 1 for a 2/2 legendary human warrior. This is the only legendary creature we're going to be talking about today. Now, it's got a bunch of abilities. Sigrid has Flash, First Strike, and then here's where it starts to get interesting. Protection from God creatures, all right? Instead of just being given protection from gods, Sigrid has been given protection from God creatures. And what this means is that it only grants protection for permanents that are in play. So there aren't gods that exist yet that do this, but let's say, for example, there is a god card that is a creature, right? But you can cycle it from your hand. Let's say they made like a black god, but you could cycle it, which is discard it and draw a card, and when you cycle it, destroy target creature. You would still be able to destroy Sigrid, because Sigrid's only protection from god creatures. And even though it is a god creature card being cycled, it's not considered a creature until it comes into play. So that's an interesting distinction, right? Now, to continue on with Sigrid's abilities, when Sigrid God Favored enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target attacking or blocking creature until Sigrid leaves the battlefield. And the flavor text says, never alone, never afraid. And I mean, why would you be afraid when you've been chosen by a god? Because that's what this represents to me, right? The idea is that Sigrid has been given the favor of a particular god, and as a result, the other gods can't mess with this because this is the chosen of that god. Now, I don't know if that's something that extends to everybody who might be god chosen. Are we going to get a god for every color and a favored individual for each color who has this same kind of ability? Will we have 5 different creatures that have protection from god creatures, or do different gods give their favor in different ways? Also, an interesting question for this is, which god actually favors Sigrid? Now, the most obvious idea would be to simply have the white god, which we've already seen. I believe his name, is it Halvar? I'm not 100% on the names of the gods yet. It'll take me a little bit longer to, you know, firm that up. But either way, I assume it's the favor of the white god. But it'd be more interesting. Imagine a white character with the favor of an enemy aligned god, right? So white's enemies are red and green. Imagine for some reason, not red and green, sorry, red and black. Green is white's ally. So imagine either a red or black god choosing to favor Sigrid, and why would they do that? But even all that put aside, just the idea of a god-favored individual is a really cool concept. As a result, I'm just kind of attributing all of the powers of this character to being favored by the gods, right? Or not gods, I should say a particular god. Kind of like that anime that me and Carly just recently watched, where this dude ends up with the favor of a god in the form of having a magical cell phone and a whole bunch of buffs on him that make him completely OP and undefeatable. So when you look at Sigrid, I view the Flash ability as the god will just teleport Sigrid wherever they want to be, just like that. First Strike, the god has made them faster than anyone else. I mean, obviously other First Strike creatures are just as fast, but you get what I'm saying, right? And the protection from gods is just the god laying their mantle of protection down upon Sigrid so that none of the other gods can lay their claws into them, because the gods are more mortal in this world, right? Gods aren't indestructible on Kaldheim, so they've got a different sort of real world mentality, which actually makes Sigrid far more terrifying because she can't be harmed by gods, but can slay gods. And that is some really epic flavor. And then on top of that, you have the concept that when Sigrid God Favors enters the battlefield, you can exile an attacking or blocking creature for as long as they're around. And this applies even to gods. So Sigrid can trap gods. I assume the creature gets trapped in that crazy sort of halberd weapon. It honestly looks like Sigrid has a crazy axe that's made up of like the darkest night sky, even compared to the night sky that's available above. It actually kind of gives me a little bit of a Nixian vibe, although admittedly the artwork's a little blurry and that might be some kind of mountain range or something behind the weapon, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. The artwork shows an aurora borealis effect up in the sky, which to me, like, just imagine a perfectly calm sky. This isn't happening at all. All of a sudden, it's almost like claws rending the sky, and the aurora borealis, the light comes flooding out of these rends in the sky, and in a blink of an eye, Sigrid just appears and makes somebody else, poof, disappear. Like, that's really, really impressive. And with this level of favor from the gods, how could you be afraid? What's there to be afraid of, right? Not even gods can defy you at that point, which is really, really cool flavor. So that is a fantastically flavorful card. Let us move on to the second spoiler we have for today, which is Resplendent Marshal. Now, this is an angel warrior as opposed to a human warrior. Each of the three cards we're going to talk about are all warriors, and they're all different races. So, Resplendent Marshal is 2 white and 1 for a 3/3 flyer, and it also has the ability that when it enters the battlefield or dies, you may exile another creature card from your graveyard. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control other than Resplendent Marshal that shares a creature type with the exiled card. So this is a very interesting concept in that you can put it into a non-angel tribal deck and have it work just fine. If you had, for example, a cleric deck and this was the only angel in it, when she comes out, boom, remove a cleric from your graveyard, all the clerics in play have +1/+1/+1, right? And then also when Resplendent Marshal goes, you get to remove another cleric and again, across the board boost all your guys. So I really do enjoy that it feels like extra effort has been put into making tribal cards that don't automatically have to be used with the tribe that's printed on the card. That makes the cards more versatile. You can easily make them a one-off in a deck. So I like that from a mechanical perspective. The idea behind it is, I guess, supposed to be the Resplendent Marshal shows up, channels the energy from the dead into this crazy kind of majestic aura that infuses and powers up everybody who shares part of the spirit of that creature. So you take Cleric's essence, the essence of the dead, and infuse it into those who are still living, which in one way is a little bit ghastly, if I'm real. But in another way, it totally feels like a Viking sort of draw strength from the fallen and they will live on through us in our deeds and all that sort of thing. So the flavor works. The artwork is pretty solid. You've got what looks like a fairly martial angel with the crazy spiked shield with all kinds of stuff etched into it, with these wings that are just radiating down energy that again has that aurora borealis kind of feel. But you can see that this isn't like nighttime, right? You can see the sun is shining behind them. This is some kind of afternoon scene. So the idea that these lights would play and be as visible is pretty impressive in the daytime, right? So overall, it's a pretty tight little package. It's not quite as flavorful as Sigrid was. Let's be real. The flavor level on Sigrid is insane, but what you get here is really solid. I remember when I first read it, I'm like, you get to put a plus, like, if you got to put the +1/+1 on the Resplendent Marshal and you were playing it in Angels, it feels like it would be too busted, right? Like 3 mana for a 4/4, and just, I feel like that would be a little too strong, but whatever. It feels like they've got It feels like they hit the point with this card where it's good, it's usable, but it's not OP. Now somebody may come along and be like, you need to eat those words later. You didn't know about resplendent hammerfall or whatever. Some like other cards that come out that make this all busted or whatever, right? I mean, we are living in the time where Magic card design has been pushed. So power levels, whatever, either way. That's my initial impressions of the card. That's all I have to say about it now. So let us move on to the card that actually posed the most interesting question for me. And that's the Rune Forged Champion. So again, we got a 3 casting cost white card. It's 1 white and 2 for this guy. He is 2/3 Dwarf Warrior. Now, when Rune Forged Champion enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for a rune card. Reveal it and put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. And also has the ability, you may pay 1 mana rather than pay the mana cost for rune spells you cast. So this obviously begs the question, what exactly is a rune card? We have had 0 hints whatsoever, right? We know that runes are a concept in Kaldheim very strongly. We've seen them in a number of locations, right? Even right down to the landscape. If you take a look at the artwork from some of the Kaldheim pathway lands, you will see that there are little glowing runes, right? And the world tree itself is going to be laden with runes. Yesterday, the dragon tokens that are not dragon tokens, but the dragon represented in the artwork that would be a dragon token, had this big set of runes like glowing along its neck. So we know that Kaldheim has that runic kind of vibe, but we don't know what runes are. Now, what I think most likely is going to happen is rune cards are going to be like a subtype, much like creature cards or like other things like that, where you have that little add-on. I think the best example might be, think back to Kamigawa block, where you would have arcane spells. So the arcane term itself doesn't mean anything. It's just a signifier that exists for rules purposes. So I believe that's what rune is going to mean as well. It's just going to show up on the type line where it says like permanent type dash rune, and then it counts as a rune card. So, I mean, when it comes to runes, runes are things that show up etched into people's bodies. Where do they come from? Well, clearly, in some cases at least, they are forged by dwarves. You can see actually an example of what I'm talking about rune-wise. If you take a look in the back of the artwork, you'll see there are a couple of runes glowing up like that in the background. And dwarves forging runes is not exactly a trope, but close. It's something that's used enough that it's trope-ish without being firmly established. You know what I mean? Like dwarves mining for gold and other metals and being master smiths, that is definitely a dwarven trope. Runes are way more niche and not quite on the same level, in my personal opinion. But the concept of runes, like magical symbols that appear on your body or whatever, that's a really cool concept. It can either be on armor or on your bodies. Actually, I remember reading an old school fantasy novel. I can't remember what it was called, but there was a really cool idea where through the use of runes, people could take the strength of other people. So I could take your agility or your physical strength or your keen eyes, and through runes, you could transfer that power to me. And so they have these like rune lords who have all these people who have willingly given up their senses and powers to the rune lord in exchange for wealth or being taken care of or whatever. You can even give your overall vitality to someone, which like increases them pretty much in every way, but puts the person into a torpor kind of sleep. Anyways, I'm going to go off too much about that really cool story. The idea of runes is really, really funky. So ultimately, the biggest question that you're going to have probably is, what type of cards are going to be runes? I mean, it's pretty easy to start ruling things out. Runes aren't going to be creatures, right? They're not going to be sorceries or instants, most likely, although you could theoretically like rune etch instant, like add a +1/+1 counter to this creature. The runes convey strength or whatever. Like that's a pretty straightforward concept. But to me, runes have more of a permanent, like laid upon you kind of feel. Rather than created in a moment, runes feel like they're sustained. So what I mean by that is runes are most likely going to be enchantment cards that like are perpetual, right? Because that's how enchantments work. They last, in most cases, enchantments last until they're dispelled. So you're enchanting these runes either into items, onto people, whatever it is. I strongly feel like the rune, it's going to be a subtype that is attached specifically to aura-style enchantments that enchant creatures, right? Although theoretically, you could have like runesmiths like enchant a land, make it indestructible. Like you could theoretically extend it beyond creatures. You could have rune-etched artifacts and stuff like that. But for me, I feel like the most logical place for runes to appear is as an enchantment on creatures. But that's just my particular opinion. So feel free to share yours since I'm done talking about these cards. So big thank you to all my patrons. Link to my newest lore video. See you all tomorrow.